Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is expected to meet with President Cyril Ramaphosa during a working visit later this week. The two leaders will reportedly discuss a range of global issues. Chief among them is the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. But beyond geopolitics, questions are being raised about the potential for long-term agricultural trade relations between South Africa as well as Ukraine. To unpack this, we are now joined by Wandile, Sihlobo, the Chief Economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa. Wandile, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. Of course, geopolitics is probably going to take the center stage once the two presidents stand and speak to the nation and essentially, by extension, also speak to the world about the conversations that they've had. But quite key to this as well is, as we know, that once that invasion took place, we know that the impact that the Russia's invasion of Ukraine had on the world supply of food, specifically for a country like South Africa as well. But you are arguing that there is potential that lies there where South Africa can actually tap into. What does that look like?
Adrian, I think you are right there, because at the end of the day, the war will end, whatever that time will be. And I think post that, Ukraine will be looking at a reconstruction phase, and that will involve business activity. And I think between South Africa, in addition to these geopolitical matters and the wars that may be discussed, of course, we have to think about what could the long-term trade look like. Because, I mean, if you look at Ukraine's overall exports, we know this is a country that has been exporting just around $60 billion worth of products each year before the wars. And if you were to look at the composition of that, agricultural products are at the top. And of course, we ourselves as South Africa, we are one of the powerhouses when it comes to agricultural exports. But there are commonalities on areas at which both Ukraine and South Africa could benefit. One of those, for example, is on the cereals, particularly wheat. As a country, we import roughly half of what we consume, about 1.8 million tons of wheat a year. And I think that we can be able to continuously import some of that from Ukraine, because so far, the likes of Russia, Canada, Australia are amongst the top suppliers to South Africa. And I think, Adrian, likewise, if you're looking at South Africa, at what we could send to Ukraine, Ukraine still spends just over $5 billion importing agricultural products. And I think in our fruit component, those are some of the products that in future we could be able to send to Ukraine.
Yeah. And how do we then open that corridor? What is it that South Africa can offer in return? Because as we know that Ukraine already has countries that it is supplying to, including the likes of China, India, and the Netherlands, and so forth?
I mean, look, I think the key thing at the moment is, of course, not us necessarily saying we want to sell this to Ukraine. Whatever the president will discuss with the president of Ukraine, one of the key things we have to look at is to say, how do we support them economically in a way that make business sense to us? And I think if you look at where they've been sending much of their wheat, it goes to Europe. You do have Middle Eastern countries that are there. And I think where the wheat quality and the standard do meet the South African side, that's the area at which we can be open to say, look, you need to explore South Africa. Because yes, we are rebuilding our own industry, but I think we do have that gap at which we can assist them. And I think that's part and parcel of those conversations that at least in the sidelines could take place to say, how do we, in a way that is for business, assist them? And I think that's the starting point when we are looking on the agricultural side. Of course, you could extend that beyond just the grains and thinking at the oil seeds as where the gaps in South Africa we may have, as well as whether Ukraine, of course, can supply something that business can be satisfied with. Because ultimately, this is not a government decision only. It will be more of a business-to-business engagement, which is why these may be sideline conversations that are essential.
Yeah, and I wonder then also whether there is potential for a broader conversation. Yes, right now we speak about South Africa, that a conversation that includes our neighboring countries. If you look, for instance, at SACU, the South African Customs Union, is there something within the South African Customs Union that South Africa could argue and say that based on what is available, this is what we can offer Ukraine, and as the region itself, this is now speaking about the SADC region itself, this is what we in return could benefit from Ukraine?
I think, Adrian, you're speaking on an important point here because as South Africa, we can only buy from the world about 1.5, 1.8 million tons of wheat to fulfill our needs. But I think if you are looking then as a region, either as SACU within the customs union or even going broader and including part of the SADC countries, you are possibly looking at close to around 3 million tons or so of wheat that may be needed by the region. And I think that's where then Ukraine, as the region, in support of their efforts, we could be able to spend on bringing some of the wheat, cognizant then that that's the private sector, quality and all of those things will matter. But then in return, in the long run, I think, of course, it's largely on the fruit and the meat side at which South Africa and the SACU region we can be able to send to Ukraine. But let's face it, the SACU countries still need a lot to improve their own agricultural production in order to be able to export. At this moment, many of them are remaining at a position where they are still net exporters. But I think working with South Africa and thinking about the long term, that strengthening of food and agricultural products trade relation is something that may be worth having a conversation about.
Yeah. In conclusion, what's your message to the president and his advisors ahead of this visit in relation to what we've just discussed?
I mean, I think, of course, the president will say what he has to say, but overall, it's important to support Ukraine, but also looking at our economic sectors, at which ones can form some partnership that in part will be beneficial to the Ukrainian people. But of course, in the long run, South Africa may also find such partnerships beneficial. And I think that's what part and parcel we should be having more so on the sideline in addition to some of the big geopolitical themes that may be discussed.
Thank you so much for your time. Wandile Sihlobo is from the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa.